Environmental defenders face many risks while protecting Jamaica's natural resources. They often lack adequate access to information, justice, and meaningful participation in decision-making. That's where the Escazú Agreement comes in. It's a landmark regional treaty designed to ensure greater access to environmental information, justice, participation, and stronger protections for environmental defenders. Hello, my global family. I'm Dana Lynn, and welcome to this special podcast series called Defending Our Rights, Environmental Justice in Jamaica, brought to you by the Jamaica Environment Trust in collaboration with Global Yadi and with support from the UNDP-implemented Global Environment Facility Small Grants Program. So this podcast series will explore what the Escazú Agreement means for Jamaica and its role in securing environmental rights and protecting defenders. And in this introductory episode, we are joined by the CEO of JET, the Jamaica Environment Trust, Dr. Theresa Rodriguez-Moodie, to unpack what this project, this series is about, and what we can look forward to under this campaign. Hello, Theresa. Welcome to Global Yadi.
Hi, Dana Lynn. Thank you so much for having me.
Or should I probably say welcome to our podcast?
Yes.
All right. So my first question is, can you give us a background into this campaign around the Escazú Agreement, environmental defenders, how it got started, and what we can look forward to?
Sure. So we started off really by having some informal sessions with the elected representative for the Escazú Agreement. So the Escazú Agreement has 6 elected representatives, 2 from the Caribbean, the rest are from Latin America. And we were trying to understand the issues related to things like access to information, access to justice, public participation, all main pillars of the Escazú Agreement. And also just what are some of the challenges that face environmental defenders here in Jamaica. And we realized that in those informal conversations, a lot of people really didn't understand, well, they didn't know about the Escazú Agreement. They didn't understand certain key elements of good governance, environmental good governance. And they also had their own stories to tell of how they have been threatened or intimidated and scared in their work, essentially. But this has not been documented. It has really been documented in Latin America, more so. It's the Latin America and the Caribbean, more so Latin America, has been considered one of the most dangerous places in the world to be an environmental defender. And there multiple murders happen every year. People are jailed and tortured every year. But there is this misconception that in the Caribbean, you guys don't have an issue. We don't have an issue here, which is not the case. The real situation is that there are issues, there are things happening to environmental defenders every day in Jamaica, but the challenge is that, or the issue is that we're not recording it. And so this is where we come in. This is where JET decided that we needed to play a role. In fact, several other organizations said this is something that JET should do. You take the role in getting this information documented, in telling these stories, in explaining these issues, but also we need to ratify this Escazú Agreement. So Jamaica signed the agreement in 2019, which signals intent, but we did not ratify. And it can't mean anything unless we ratify and then we implement in local law. So this is where, in a nutshell, I mean, it's not quite a nutshell, but this is the background to why we're here today.
Right. So I don't want to give away too much because obviously this is a start of a podcast series, and so we're gonna have other guests come on to break down other elements of the agreement and looking at the broader backdrop of these challenges and different contexts in which we have to navigate, environmental issues, public participation, and the other pillars. But what I wanted you mentioned that we signed and we haven't ratified. So just a quick explanation, for persons who might be following what it means to ratify an agreement.
So ratifying this agreement would mean that it has to be implemented in local law.
Right.
right? So if you talk about access to justice, well, let's do something a little simpler, like the access to information. What do you have in local law to support when we talk about making sure that we have access to information? We have our Access to Information Act. So basically, you need to ensure that all pillars that in the agreement, that there is room for it in our local law.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for that clarification. So we know that this podcast series is obviously looking at the awareness around not just Escazú, but as you mentioned, environmental defenders. What are the challenges that they face? How are we navigating this? But this is part of a broader campaign. So can you tell us more about that campaign as well and what it hopes to achieve?
All right. So, well, ultimately, we want Jamaica to ratify this agreement. Okay. Ultimately, this is the big picture. But we realize that because not enough people understand, first of all, who is an environmental defender, why environmental defenders are so important, not just to Jamaica, but just generally when we talk about environmental protection. And what is the Escazú Agreement and these three main pillars, right? So we figured, well, we need to start from somewhere. We need to do the education. And this is why we're having the podcast. So the podcast is intended to take different elements to introduce and talk about different aspects of the podcast. Of the agreement in a way that people will understand, better understand. We're also going to have a landing page on our main website, jamaicans.org. And it's supposed to, if you want more information, this is the place to go to. We're sending you to a place. If you want the agreement, if you want to know about anything related to the agreement, if you want access to the podcast, if you want to go on our social media, because we're also going to be having a separate social media page, Defenders JA, on Instagram. And the idea is we'll build awareness in different ways. We're going to even have a little jingle about, your right. So not so much your right to a healthy environment, but that's a key part of it. But, talking about the different pillars of the Escazú Agreement. And ultimately, we want to encourage people to sign a petition, which will then be submitted to the government of Jamaica. And hopefully they'll hear our voice. The multiple voices that are calling for the ratification, because we understand what this Escazú Agreement means. And really and truly, if we don't cross the finish line and then start implementation, then it's just another one of those things that we sign and just doesn't end up going anywhere.
Right. All right. So I want to walk back to the response that you gave, and I'm gonna give back. I'm gonna replay your questions that I want you to answer in the order you said it. Where people may have interest in knowing who is an environmental defender and why are environmental defenders important.
All right. So an environmental defender, you and I are environmental. You don't need a job title, right?
Right.
You don't need to be in an NGO. You don't need to be in any organization. The fact is, if you're working peacefully to protect the environment, whether it is as an individual or a group, then you can be considered an environmental defender. Remember, a healthy environment, well, for Jamaica, it's not in every country. In our constitution, in our Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms, we are guaranteed the right to a healthy environment. It's a basic human right as well. That the right to clean air, the right to clean water, safe food, safe climate, these are all elements of when we talk about the right to a healthy environment, what a healthy environment means. And so environmental defenders are simply just defending that right. It's a human right. And so this is why they call it a rights defender. You are simply just defending your basic human right to a healthy environment. And oftentimes, this means that you come up in opposition,
right,
of very powerful interests. Sometimes it's state parties. Sometimes they're private entities. And the main focus for these individuals or these groups and organizations is money. Not really considering that there has to be more to life than the economy. So you have a lot of people who are driven from their lands,
right,
whose rivers are polluted, whose lands are contaminated, whose lands are sterilized because they can no longer farm it, for example, due to bauxite mining. And you, in coming up, in trying to defend this basic right, you have these risks. People's lives are at risks oftentimes. And this is really why this Escazú Agreement is so important. You asked a second question, and I just can't remember what
I think you're getting there in terms of why is your role important, and I think that's coming out in what you're saying.
So, well, the fact is that oftentimes if you don't have environmental defenders that are standing up in opposition for some of these major developments that are destroying our environment, then who does it? You can't depend, in many instances, unfortunately, you cannot depend on the government to really defend that right, which they have put in law in many countries. And so environmental defenders are the ones that are standing up again to protect these rights, and they're the ones that are coming up against a lot of opposition, and they're very important. And this is why we also talk about the protection. And under the Escazú Agreement, this is another aspect very unique to anything else, that it talks about the protection of environmental defenders.
There's a lot to think about. And when you mentioned, like who will do it, it made me think about this saying that if the whole world depends on the whole world, nothing gets done.
Exactly.
So, you can't just be called to action, because you refer to the community example. And I think about what's happening in the news sometimes with the fish kill.
Right.
And, sometimes it might not be a group, may have, there doesn't have to be a bespoke community group that existed. But then if people take a stand and we're coming together to say, this can't go in this way.
A lot of times things started like on a veranda. I mean, in fact, that's how JET began. It was a group of people that were really concerned about what was happening in the environment and decided to move it from just talk to action. Not everybody is really prepared to go the full route. And remember, when you're protecting the environment, when you're acting in defense of the environment, it doesn't have to look like a protest. It doesn't have to look like living in a forest so that you don't cut down a tree. We see some extreme examples, but a lot of times it's writing letters of objection. It's writing articles. It's coming out and speaking out against unjust actions.
Right.
And it can be very simple as sharing things on social media very widely, because we understand that depending on where you work, for example, you may not be able to be as vocal. You face that risk that if you are too vocal as well, you could lose your job, or people could come and find you and then say no, you shouldn't be, and you have this kind of butting of heads and so forth, which can sometimes escalate. And so you can do whatever you feels right and whatever feels comfortable to you. So if it means that you're just sharing other people's things on social media because you want to build awareness of fast fashion, for example, and you want to encourage people to stop purchasing all of these fast fashion items which are destroying the environment and different countries and their environment when it shifts off. These are things that you can do in your own at your own comfort level as well. But then there are some that are just going to go that much further.
Yes.
And whatever feels right and comfortable. So somebody actually said to me that they think that environmental defenders is a term that sounds militant. No, it's not. It's simple. You are defending this basic right.
But you see, maybe that's the thing too, which I do agree with you that maybe it's you're defending basic right and you need to. But sometimes we take umbrage with things is that the most important thing? It sounds so militant, because sometimes, Theresa, the thing is you have to agitate for change.
Exactly.
And sometimes it's you mentioned, sometimes to defend, you have to come up in opposition. And sometimes we need to be uncomfortable to effect change. And so that's it. But I love the perspective that you also shared, where there's no action that's insignificant, because sometimes you sharing something, somebody would be like, I never thought about it that way. And then you actually invite somebody into the larger discourse. So I noticed as well that there's a lot of traction, and it's a good thing, happening around the Escazú Agreement. And so you spoke a lot to it, but I still want you to underscore, why is it important for Jamaica at this time, and how it fits into JET's broader work in environmental governance.
All right. So we started earlier by letting you know that the Escazú Agreement has three main pillars: access to justice, access to information, and meaningful public participation. These are all elements of good governance, all elements of environmental good governance. And the fact is that if you don't have information, how can you make decisions? If you are not invited to the table, then how can you let your voice be heard? We cannot have decisions being made that will impact us negatively or positively, and we are not consulted, and we are not aware. And you see this thing about access to justice as well. When things fail, when you're not able to get that information, you're not invited to the table to discuss these issues which are going to impact you, you need to be able to take the next step. Because if we're talking about good governance, we're talking about democracy, these are all real basic tenets of democracy, of good governance. And so it's very important that you also have the route to take in terms of seeking justice. But a big part of that is this big thing about justice. The big part of that is if people don't understand who an environmental defender is or the importance of a healthy environment, then your claim, your complaint, you trying to get justice, seek remedy or whatever, it may not be taken seriously. So this is also why it's important that we educate not just the general public and the environmental defenders, but our judges, our lawyers, our police force, our politicians. Everybody needs to understand that when we say, oh, we consulted the public, that you can find the minutes of the meeting, that people were invited widely to the table. Nothing was held in secret. Too many times, for example, you're told, yeah, man, we had a public consultation. Well, who was invited? Because I certainly wasn't, or this community who's being impacted wasn't. We need to really broaden that, because if we want to talk about this good governance and democracy, we really need to walk that talk.
We love the objective and where this campaign is going in terms of bringing this awareness around environmental defenders and how and why they should be protected. And of course, letting people know about this landmark treaty, which is the Escazú Agreement, the first in Latin America and the Caribbean. And so beyond the campaign itself, a lot of work has to be done in getting Jamaica to ratify the agreement. What is JET's role in that process?
Well, so this is where we come in with the project that we're working on with that UNDP, the Jeff Small Grants Program has supported us in. Our role is engaging with the public, the environmental defenders, engaging with them to educate them, to provide them with information, to provide them with a space to discuss, ask questions, to share their stories, for us to document these stories, because we're hoping to submit this also to the Commission, ECLAC, and who is really in charge of the Escazú Agreement, so that when we're talking about the different issues that face environmental defenders, Latin America and the Caribbean, it tends to be lumped. But we can really start pulling out those stories about what's happening in the different countries at the Caribbean level. So we're having those conversations, virtual conversations, in-person conversations. We're trying to engage the government also to try and understand, if there is a roadblock, what is a roadblock, and can we help in trying to, because this is not a us against them kind of situation, right? If there's a role that CSOs can play, if there's a role that other individuals can play, then tell us, let us know, let us understand. So our role is really just to make sure that we play that, we're playing that role in educating and building that awareness and driving people to the different points of information, and hopefully get them on board to sign that petition when we decide to launch it.
All right. And so Every campaign or project has a life cycle. And already I'm jumping ahead. It has barely started, but I want to go to the end of it so people see where is this leading to. So we understand clearly what we want to do within the lifetime of the campaign. But then these kinds of issues continue beyond. So you mentioned a while ago about the CSOs, the civil society organizations, the public, government. What role do you want what do you want people to do beyond the life of this campaign? How can we sustain the momentum?
So our project ends in 2026, right? So if, it won't be the end of the world by that point if the government hasn't made a decision to ratify. But what we're thinking about is that since we would have, hopefully by then, increased the awareness, met with more people, hopefully people would have understood and not be scared of that term, environmental defenders, and the right to a healthy environment, and truly have an appreciation of it beyond just words. We're hoping that people will continue to join us because we're not going to stop. I mean, we were asking for the ratification of the Escazú Agreement before we got this project. We've been asking for it for many years, since we signed, in fact, because we need to cross that finish line. But, even if we do not end up crossing that finish line, if we can have some improvements in those 3 pillars, so if you don't want to call it Escazú Agreement, but if we can have some improvements in those pillars, if we can have improvements in how we get information, the proactive dissemination of information, so that we don't have to constantly be asking for information. These are things that, you should just have available on any website. Not any website, but any organizations that's dealing with the environment. So for example, NEPA's website, National Environment and Planning Agency's website, they should be proactively releasing more than just environmental impact assessments, but any form of environmental assessment, any kind of water quality report of Rio Cobre or air quality reports, those should be just freely available to the public. And then the same thing for public participation. We don't really have any kind of guidelines outside of EIAs for how the public should be consulted, outside of, say, a policy paper, green paper. We need to have we need to actually understand. I mean, I was standing up with a colleague of mine who's just turned to me just casually and said, and he works in government, and was like, what public participation actually mean? Like, I hear it all the time, but really, what does it mean? Right? Meaningful. And we want to use the word meaningful, right? What does this really mean? Because I think oftentimes it's kind of like, oh, we had a little meeting, check public participation. So we want to see movement, improvements. Hopefully it will be faster and not incremental, but at the end of the day, change is important. Improvements are necessary. And I think that, again, if we don't have that, and I want to just say that ratification is not a magic wand. It's not going to solve any issue, really. And so it doesn't stop. Even if at the end of our project, you have ratification, it doesn't actually stop there. We need to implement. You have to create a roadmap for how you're going to be implementing it. You need to monitor. There will be compliance issues. But even if you don't go that whole route, the fact is, if we have those incremental or faster improvements in those 3 main pillars, and then also if we have even where we have the term environmental defenders more understood and readily accepted by our government and the general public, then I think that it's something that we would say we would have succeeded.
So finally, my question for you, and when I heard you talk about improvement and movement, I'm like, here's a jingle forming that you mentioned earlier. So knowledge is power. And because all of this hinges on defending rights, you have to know your rights in order to defend them. And so while we're looking at the bigger picture of environmental defenders, people need to understand what the Escazú Agreement is about. So how can they do that? Where can they go for more information on the Escazú Agreement?
All right, so we have on JET's main page, which is jamentrust.org, we'll have a subdomain that will be all focused on environmental defenders. And then we'll also have an Instagram page, DefendersJA, and that there you can find all the little information. Hopefully we'll be able to, you'll find the podcast, you'll we'll
Hopefully.
No, we'll have the podcast. But I mean that hopefully we'll be able to, also present things in digestible bits.
Yes.
That's why we know everybody needs things in
Bite sizes
nowadays. But we want that we'll have information available in different ways for different attention spans, for different interest levels as well. As I said, if you can go away from this entire process by even understanding your right to a healthy environment, that first you have a right to a healthy environment and what that actually means, then we can check a box. And then if you can understand, an environmental defender is important, and this is, the one thing I want to make sure that people understand is that, you see, when you're protecting your right to a healthy environment, you're not anti-development.
Right.
Because development is not just economic development. That's a very narrow view. Development is about your clean air, your clean water. It's about, if you are able...
Improvement, you said it.
Sustainable development, right? So if I'm not compromising the environment so my children or my grandchildren can't, or if I am compromising it so that they can't benefit from it, we have a problem. That is not sustainable development. We don't really understand that. We need to have a better understanding and appreciation of what that really means.
I love that. All right. So I feel like people are watching and have so many more questions, but that's all the more reason we have more episodes for you that you can tune into. But I want to say, Theresa, thank you for taking the time to come and, break down the Escazú Agreement, even though we have more to go, but just to give us this overview and the roadmap to where this campaign will be going. And we're really, happy that at this time, we can give attention to this issue and underscore the role of environmental defenders in Jamaica.
Thank you so much for having me, Danalyn.
All right, so there you have it. Our first episode on I don't want to say the Escazú Agreement, but defending our rights, environmental justice in Jamaica. And we invite you to like, follow, share, subscribe. You know what to do. Want to say thank you so much for tuning in. And we hope that you will continue to check in with us. And if you have questions, we hope to answer them in the following episodes, as well as going on the Defenders JA page, to see more about the Escazú Agreement and the campaign overall.